Hello, good people. It's great to be with you. And as promised, I'm coming back to read the second part of this chapter in Joseph Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity. And so here goes. The second part, I'm going to actually read the second and third part. There's two more parts to go. The third part is real short. But the second part is the transformation of the God of the philosophers. So the entire chapter is entitled The God of Faith and the God of the Philosophers. And I hope you listened to the first part in which he talked about the fact that the church had made a decision for the God of the philosophers. And now he's going to talk about how the faith of the church transforms that concept of God. Of course, the other side of the picture must not be overlooked. By deciding exclusively in favor of the God of the philosophers and logically declaring this God to be the God who speaks to man and to whom one can pray, the Christian faith gave a completely new significance to this God of the philosophers, removing him from the purely academic realm and thus profoundly transforming him. This God, who had previously existed as something neutral, as the highest culminating concept, this God who had been understood as pure being or pure thought, circling around forever, closed in upon itself without reaching over to man in his little world. This God of the philosophers, whose pure eternity and unchangeability had excluded any relation with the changeable and transitory, now appeared to the eye of faith as the God of men, who is not only thought of all thoughts, the eternal mathematics of the universe, but also agape, the power of creative love. In this sense, there does exist in the Christian faith what Pascal experienced on the night when he wrote on a slip of paper that he henceforth kept sewn in the lining of his jacket, the words, "Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob," not God of the philosophers and scholars. He had encountered the burning bush experience as opposed to a God sinking back completely into the realm of mathematics, and had realized that the God who is the eternal geometry of the universe can only be this because he is creative love, because he is the burning bush from which a name issues forth, through which he enters the world of man. So in this sense, there is the experience that the God of the philosophers is quite different from what the philosophers had thought him to be, though he does not thereby cease to be what they had discovered. That one only comes to know him properly when one realizes that he, the real truth and ground of all being, is at one and the same time the God of faith, the God of men. In order to see the transformation undergone by the philosophical concept of God through being equated with the God of faith, one need only look at any passage in the Bible that speaks of God. Let us take quite at random Luke 15:1 through 10, the parables of the lost sheep and the lost drachma. The point of departure is the irritation felt by the scribes and Pharisees at the fact that Jesus sat down to eat with sinners. In reply comes the story of the man who owns 100 sheep, loses one of them, goes after it, looks for it, and finds it, and rejoices more than over the 99 for which he never needed to search. The story of the lost drachma that, when found again, causes more joy than the one that was never lost, tends in the same direction. Quote, "Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." This parable, in which Jesus depicts and justifies his activity and his task as the emissary of God, involves not only the relations between God and man, but also the question of who God himself is. If we try to answer the question on the basis of this passage, we shall have to say that the God whom we encounter here appears to be, as in so many passages of the Old Testament, highly anthropomorphic, highly unphilosophical. He has emotions as a man does. He rejoices, he seeks, he waits, he goes to meet. He is not the unfeeling geometry of the universe, neutral justice, standing above things, undisturbed by a heart and its emotions. He has a heart. He stands there like a person who loves with all the capriciousness of someone who loves. Thus, in this passage, the transformation of purely philosophical thinking becomes clear, and it becomes apparent how far we still are fundamentally from this identification of the God of faith and the God of the philosophers, how incapable we are of catching up with it, and how badly our basic image of God and our understanding of the Christian reality come to grief on this very point. And I do want to say that Ratzinger has italicized those words, on this very point, in the book. Most people today still admit in some form or other that there probably is some such thing as a, quote, supreme being, unquote. But people find it an absurd idea that this being should concern himself with man. We have the feeling, for it happens again and again, even to those who try to believe, that this sort of thing is the expression of a naive anthropomorphism, of a primitive mode of thought, comprehensible in a situation in which man still lived in a small world, in which the earth was the center of all things, and God had nothing else to do but look down on it. But we think in an age when we know how infinitely different things are, how unimportant the earth is in the vast universe, and consequently how unimportant that little speck of dust, man, is in comparison with the dimensions of the cosmos. In an age like this, it seems an absurd idea that this supreme being should concern himself with man, his pitiful little world, his cares, his sins, and his nonsense. But although we may think that in this way we are speaking about God in an appropriately divine manner, in reality, we are in fact thinking of him in a very petty and only too human way, as if he had to be selective so as not to miss the overview. We thereby imagine him as a consciousness like ours, which has limits, must somewhere or other call a halt, and can never embrace the whole. In contrast to such limited notions, the aphorism with which Holderlin prefaced his Hyperion will serve to recall the Christian image of the true greatness of God. Not to be encompassed by the greatest, but to let oneself be encompassed by the smallest, that is divine. The boundless spirit who bears in himself the totality of being reaches beyond the greatest, so that to him it is small, and he reaches into the smallest because to him nothing is too small. Precisely this overstepping of the greatest and reaching down into the smallest is the true nature of absolute spirit. At the same time, we see here a reversal in value of maximum and minimum, greatest and smallest, that is typical of the Christian understanding of reality. To him who, as spirit, upholds and encompasses the universe, a spirit, a man's heart with its ability to love, is greater than all the Milky Ways in the universe. Quantitative criteria become irrelevant. Other orders of magnitude become visible, according to which the infinitely small is the truly embracing and truly great. From this angle, yet another prejudice is unmasked as a prejudice. It always seems to us, in the last analysis, self-evident that the infinitely great, the absolute spirit, cannot be emotion and feeling, but only pure cosmic mathematics. We unthinkingly assume that pure thought is greater than love. Well, the message of the gospel and the Christian picture of God contained in it corrects philosophy and lets us know that love is higher than mere thought. Absolute thought is a kind of love. It is not unfeeling idea, but creative because it is love. To sum up, we can say that in the deliberate connection with the God of the philosophers made by the Christian faith, purely philosophical thinking was transcended on two fundamental points. Now he's going to say those two fundamental points. Point A, the philosophical God is essentially self-centered, thought simply contemplating itself. The God of faith is basically defined by the category of relationship. He is creative fullness encompassing the whole. Thereby, a completely new picture of the world, a completely new world order is established. The highest possibility of being with a capital B, no longer seems to be the detachment of him who exists in himself and needs only himself. On the contrary, the highest mode of being includes the element of relationship. It is hardly necessary to say what a revolution it must mean for the direction of man's existence when the supreme being no longer appears as absolute enclosed autarky, but turns out to be at the same time involvement, creative power, which creates and bears and loves other things. And now, this is the second point, point B. The philosophical God is pure thought. He is based on the notion that thought and thought alone is divine. The God of faith, as thought, is also love. His image is based on the conviction that to love is divine. The logos of the whole world, the creative, original thought, is at the same time love. In fact, this thought is creative because as thought, it is love, and as love, it is thought. It becomes apparent that truth and love are originally identical, that where they are completely realized, they are not two parallel or even opposing realities, but one, the one and only absolute. At this point, it also becomes possible to glimpse the starting point of the confession of faith in the triune God, to which we shall return later. And now the third, final, and short section of this chapter, and it's entitled The Reflection of the Question in the Text of the Creed. So remember that the overarching framework of this book is the discussion of the Apostles' Creed. So he now wants to say how this question of the God of faith and the God of the philosophers and the church's option for the God of the philosophers and transformation of that idea, how this is going to show up in the Creed. So part 3 of this chapter. In the Apostles' Creed, the point of departure of our reflections, the paradoxical unity of the God of faith and the God of the philosophers, on which the Christian image of God rests, is expressed in the juxtaposition of the two attributes, Father and Almighty, or Lord of all. The second title, Pantocrator in Greek, points back to the Old Testament Yahweh Sabaoth, the meaning of which can no longer be fully elucidated. Literally translated, it means something like God of hosts, God of powers. It is sometimes rendered in the Greek Bible by Lord of powers. For all the uncertainties about its origin, we can at any rate see that this word is intended to describe God as the Lord of heaven and earth. It was probably intended above all to define him in opposition to the Babylonian religion of the stars as the Lord to whom the stars too belong, alongside whom the stars cannot exist as independent divine powers. The stars are not gods, but his tools at his disposal like a warlord's armies. Thus, the word Pantocrator has at first a cosmic significance. Later, it also has a political sense, describing God as the Lord of all lords. By calling God simultaneously Father and Almighty, the Creed has joined together a family concept and the concept of cosmic power in the description of the one God. It thereby expresses accurately the whole point of the Christian image of God, the tension between absolute power and absolute love, absolute distance and absolute proximity, between absolute being, again, being with capital B, and a direct affinity with the most human side of humanity, the interplay of maximum and minimum of which we spoke just now. The word Father, which in its reference point here still remains quite open, at the same time links the first article of the Creed to the second. It points forward to Christology and thus harnesses the two sections together in such a way that what is said of God only becomes fully comprehensible when one at the same time looks over at the Son. For example, what almightiness and lordship of all mean only becomes clear from a Christian point of view in the crib and the cross. It is only here where the God who is recognized as Lord of all has voluntarily chosen the final degree of powerlessness by delivering himself up to his weakest creature, that the Christian concept of the almightiness of God can be truly formulated. At this point, simultaneously, a new concept of power and a new concept of lordship and dominion are born. The highest power is demonstrated as the calm willingness completely to renounce all power, and we are shown that it is powerful not through force, but only through the freedom of love, which, even when it is rejected, is stronger than the exultant powers of earthly violence. Here and only here does that reevaluation of criteria and dimensions that made itself heard earlier in the antithesis of maximum and minimum finally come into its own. And that concludes the reading of this chapter. Thank you for your attention. And I will get back soon again to this book. Perhaps I will do a bit of short commentary on how I think this chapter relates to the conversations that we've been having in our little corner of the internet. In fact, you would like to join me in an online conversation about that. If you found that this is a very pertinent chapter, I would love to us possibly get together and talk online about that. In the meantime, until we're together again, treat yourself as though you are someone you are responsible for helping, because you are responsible, so am I, and together we are making the world. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching.